Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Literacy Podcast. Melissa and Lori love literacy. We are thrilled to be here with today's guest because something that he worked on and wrote caught our eye, and we just can't wait to hear about this from the source. Melissa, I know you're pumped up for it.
Yeah. So I think I found this and sent it over to you because texts are obviously really important for what we talk about on this podcast, and we talked about
important.
The most important. Students are the most important.
That's true. I'm sorry. Yes. We can do a ranking.
Then a text. But text complexity has been a conversation for a while, especially since Common Core has come out. But it caught my eye that there's kind of a new way to look at text that included some new things, and that's what we'll talk about today. So I'm excited to talk to Quintin about that.
Yes, indeed.
Perfect.
Yes, indeed.
Quintin, welcome. How are you?
Welcome.
Hey, everybody. What's up? Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here and be chatting with you all. I'm excited.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Better than that rain down there in Atlanta, right?
Yeah, better than the rain. I'm like, it is really icky outside. And I'm like, it's a very thin line between the couch and a blanket and the computer. So I'm trying to options right now.
You look very cozy though in your plaid shirt. Like it looks like a fall day versus a summer day there. So
yeah, that's what it feels like. But I'm sure the humidity will catch up to me later. So it'll be probably a t-shirt later.
All right. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name's Quintin here in Atlanta, Georgia. So pretty much my life has been very birth through 5, early childhood space. And so pretty much started my career a few years ago working in a preschool and pre-K classroom and fell in love with using books. And so
nice.
It was just one of those things where it was teaching is nervous, being your first year, fresh out. You're am I going to do this right? And so one of my safe places was with books and with kids. And so that really just sparked my work in text analysis and diversity in children's literature. And over the years, once I got into my PhD program and finished that up, it was just I think this is the space that I want to be in. And then as my advisor would say, you're finished now. So hopefully this is your space you want to be in. I'm like, yeah,
right.
I'm excited. The power of books, the stories they bring. My dissertation work does a lot of pushing the lines and pushing the boundaries on some more traditional and formal ways of thinking. And so just super excited to be talking about how I push these boundaries and ways that we can think differently about using books and engaging in conversations around them.
Absolutely. This came from the toolkit that you helped write, so I'm totally stealing this from you, but there was a quote in there from Dr. Alfred Tatum that was, I constantly ask myself, of all the texts in the world, why do I want to put this text in front of my students? And I just took that away. I was like, oh, that's such a good, there's so many texts out there. Why this one?
Yeah. And you know what? So I am a firm believer that books should do a lot of things. Books should teach vocabulary, but books should tell stories, books should share experiences. But one thing I've recently began to hone in on is the idea that books bring joy. And Dr. Gholdy Muhammad talks a lot about the idea that books can bring joy and the power of that joy. And so it's one thing when I pick up a book and say, all right, well, here's the vocabulary word I'm going to push in today. I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to look at this sentence and use this word over and over again, the real technical stuff, right? But then you look at it and say, now, after all that, was the kid happy? Was his child joyful going through it? And when you add that layer and you kind of look at books differently, especially when you look at representation, especially because my dissertation work is all about representation, especially surrounding Black and brown boys. And so being a Black and brown boy, looking at these books from the lens of a researcher through the lens of diversity, I started seeing some of my favorite books becoming less of my favorite books over time. Specifically some of the Ezra Jack Keats books. Some of my work looks at really how, race and racism is represented. And you look at this book and it's wow, Peter's such a prominent character in our community, in the Black community, and in the world of children's literature. But then you look at the background images and you look at the different narratives that are really there. It's you kind of ask it another question, and then sometimes that answer isn't always the answer that you want to hear. But it's the work that has to be done, questions that need to be asked.
Yeah. I that reminds me of, I'm looking at, actually, of your toolkit, in the section titled Know Yourself, Know Your Students. Mm-hmm. And what you just mentioned makes me think of that. I feel like actually everything you say could apply to probably every section of the toolkit. But it's in this section in particular, I really liked the stop and consider. I love the little green boxes. The stop and consider. Don't presume students' identity markers. Do the work to get to know them. Take care to work against the assumption that because you share an identity marker with a student, you can connect with their specific experiences. And that reminds me of what you just spoke about.
Yeah, I always say we're all on different journeys in life, and I work in the space of like diversity and anti-racism, and so I use this as an example. Is that we're all on this journey in anti-racism. We're all on this journey about learning about diversity. Just because I'm Black doesn't mean that I can pick up a book and I know the culture from front to back. There are many different dialects in the way we speak. There are many different makeups of our ethnicity and things of that sort. And so one thing for me I had to learn, and I can share an example of my journey. So when I taught in a preschool classroom, I had a little boy that would come in and his pants would be sagging. So as a Black man, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't want you to be another Black boy out here who's quote unquote sagging his pants. And I just had all these preconceived notions about what this one action or behavior really meant or made this child to be. And so being my savior self at that point was like, I'm going to go buy him a belt. I'm going to go buy this kid a belt. And then talk to the parent, was like, hey, hey, Dad, I want to make sure that, he's not sagging his pants and, making sure he has a belt. So I went and bought one. And ultimately it came that I was offensive in a way, and where the father shared that, I worry about putting food on the table. I worry about making sure he can afford preschool. I worry about making sure he has food on the table and shoes on his feet. The belt is not a priority for me right now. So thank you for noticing. But had you opened up the door and had the conversation, you wouldn't be here today. And that right there in itself was so powerful, because it let me know that my assumption based on what I saw was wrong. And we can't assume. And we do the same thing about the kids walking into our classroom. We see, we think you can see their race, you can see their gender, you can see their background, their social class, but can you really take what you see and apply that to that child? And even if you could, I always like to say that we can't just take an idea of a culture and see a child being part of that culture and just lay on all these stereotypical ideas and facts about them. It's more of like, how is a child a piece of this culture? And what does this child bring to their culture? There are many different cultures, not just their one race. They have their gender, their sexual orientation, their religion, their social class, even the way they carry themselves and where they live at. All these different things have an impact on who they are. And so know yourself. You have to know yourself and say, I need to grow in this journey still about diversity, or I need to take the first step and say, what am I doing to be oppressive in this space? And what am I doing to give liberty and give agency in this space? And when you start asking yourself those questions, you may kind of rethink what you're doing, the way you approach things like selecting books for the classroom.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think we should pause real quick, if you don't mind, and just I think we should talk to the audience a little bit and let them know about this toolkit, because we've mentioned it already a couple of times. So can you just tell us?
Yes, that's a good idea.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about it.
We dove right in.
Listen, so
this is why Melissa is so good, because I'm like ready to keep going and have a conversation, and I totally forgot that everybody listening has not seen the toolkit.
Exactly. No, we can definitely let's take a step back. I love it. So basically, should I just jump on in now?
Yes. Yep. Go for it.
Cool. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So basically the way it's worked is that, so Student Achievement Partners, Achieve the Core, they had a really cool project going on. So of course they're all about using complex text, but what they realized is that after seeing what was happening in the world around us, seeing the need for an increase in diversity in children's literature, they wanted to formulate a plan to say, okay, how can we re-examine and look at our tools and really push forward. And so that kind of was that first layer of know yourself. So as an organization, it had to like look at ourselves, learn ourselves. And then from that point, we can then move forward. And so, as you all know, I was a teacher too. You can tell me this great grand idea, right? But until you tell me step by step how to do it, I might not do it. I was what's step one? What's step two? What's step three? And so we kind of try to like take that idea of like, if a teacher was actually to pick up a book or this tool, what would it look like? And so we grounded these ideas of text complexity, but also the ideas of CRP, cultural responsive pedagogy, and thought about, it's one thing for a book to bring academic success, but does it bring social political consciousness? Does it bring critical consciousness? Does it help children think about their identity and how they are situated in this world? Does it do all of that? And so pretty much we came up with this tool that we have been piloting in different spaces with different teachers, just saying, you know, what are the different aspects of being on this journey of picking diverse books, but not only thinking about the books you put, but your journey personally as well. So know yourself before you choose these books. Once you learn yourself, learn your students. After you learn your students, now we can look at the complexity of the text. Now we can look at the questions like, is the character portrayed in the book, is the author and illustrator actually a person from that culture, have the same lived experiences as the character? I think about like Ezra Jack Keats, for example. Peter was a Black character. His family was Black. Did Ezra Jack Keats have those same lived experiences because he was a white man? He may have not. But we know there are some identities there that aren't actually represented and shared between both the author, the illustrator, and the character themselves. And so a lot of these critical questions around like power, identity, why is this happening, for what reasons, was really some of the grounding conversations and questions that really helped to guide this tool development.
Yeah. And I just want to like throw out what I love about it. Because when I think to the, like, I don't want to call it the old text complexity or text analysis toolkit. Like, I don't know what we call it now, but the other one, but they came before.
The previous version.
The previous version that had the 4 categories. You know, I'm really used to using that, and it kind of, you know, it falls into the 4 different places, and you say like, I don't have any of the language in front of me right now.
Qualitative rubrics and
yep. And it's like, yes, this is like moderately difficult, or it's, you know, slightly complex, right?
What are the different tasks that are being asked and things of that sort. Yeah.
And what I loved about this was like, you can't do that with this, right? You can't just check off a box and say like, yes, this text it hits the mark and like good to go for everybody, because the text is going to land differently for a teacher, for a student, for the students that are in front of them. And honestly, it's more about the hard work of the teacher going through this, you know, process and thinking through, who are my students and what's in this text, and how, you know, where are the places it's going to land well or not? I just love it.
And I love what you just said, because that also goes back into our grounding with this tool, is that, you know, Radine Sims Bishop has this idea of windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. You know, and the books should be windows. They should be mirrors of children's reflection. They also should be sliding glass doors where they use their breed imagination, something that kids don't use much anymore. We should encourage our kids to use their imagination. Having those books that really help them to do that. But also, I think one thing I do want to say is that looking at this tool, it can be easy to say, I need a checkbox, right? I need a checkbox. And you may think, okay, once I have this checkbox, this book has this score. And if it has this score, then it can move on. But that's actually not the purpose of it. The purpose is, you know, this book so well, what it does and what it does not do, that you can now pair it with different books and different experiences. And so I still may use the Ezra Jack Keats books in my classrooms, but I'm also going to provide other experiences such as Crown and Ode to the Fresh Cut, a book that talks about the lived experience in a barbershop, written by a Black man and illustrated by a Black man. So multiple perspectives of what the Black community looks like. And so the idea is that this tool helps you to really understand what this certain book does and how it functions, and how you as a teacher can then step into your teaching space and say, okay, cool. Multiple perspectives. What other books and ideas and perspectives can I bring in here to really help our students understand the full grasp of what we're learning today?
Yeah, that is like a great example. And I'm just going to throw another one out because I've been reading Thunder Rolling in the Mountains, which is about the Nez Perce experience, a Native American tribe, but it's written by Scott Odell, who's a white man. And although he did a lot of research and, talked to some of the Nez Perce that were still living at the time, he's still a white man. Exactly. And so there's a lot of talk of like, well, how do we bring like Chief Joseph's actual voice to the table versus just this novel. So,
And I will say too, there's so many different factors I think that really impact that itself. I mean, I think about like publishing. The publishing industry is crazy. It's so political, and there are so many different organizations now, like such as We Need Diverse Books, who are really trying to promote the voices of scholars and writers of color, even like the Brown Bookshelf. They do an amazing job promoting books from authors and illustrators of color. But I think one of the biggest things for me is that we have to teach children at a very early age that their voice matters and that their voice has power. I mean, it may have been my experience, but growing up, I don't believe I was encouraged much to be a writer or an illustrator or to share my story. It was more like, I'm going to go to school, get a great job, whether it's science, math, or a doctor, maybe going to be an athlete, and then go from there, boom. And so I'm so glad I fell into education because it was one of my little spaces. But I also realized over the years that, when I taught, I had kids who were fearful to speak up, like fearful to make choices and fearful to use their own words and feel comfortable in using their own words. And that's that's the most hurtful thing for me as a teacher who was really trying to promote equity and voice and change. And I have students who are literally, sometimes because of their culture, taught to be talked to and not with. And so when I think about how to elevate voices, it's learning with the student, learning with the family, learning with the culture, learning with your peers around you, because perspectives matter. Like they matter so much. And we got to really learn how to encourage our students to be writers so that way they can grow up and start writing these books that their the later generations can see. I mean, I'm even in a space right now, I'm like, I need to write a book too. Like I'm doing all this work about, like, why not write a book? I'm like, okay, cool.
Good point.
It'll increase.
Yeah. I think that's so important that their voice matters and their voices have power. And like, to me, it draws back to what we were all just talking about is, it's really easy to take a checklist and to like check boxes. And it is kind of the easy way out. And it was a way to, I think, identify whether things were there or they weren't. And I think in the process of moving to complex text, I should say, when with Common Core coming down the line. And I mean, that was so long ago, but it seemed like checklists were a good first step in that. And so transitioning to this now really powerful way of thinking. And to me, there's this resource that you created that has the potential for me as an educator to really reflect, but then take my reflections in this toolkit and have those powerful conversations with my fellow teammates, with leaders, so that I can say, we are using these materials, and I'm noticing that these voices are elevated. And I think there also might be space during small group time to include this other text, or space during, our social studies content time to integrate this other text that would be really helpful in including another voice or another perspective. So I think, we want to teach our children that, but the hard work comes in the deep work that we have with our voices too, as we learn and grow in this space. And the toolkit is a fantastic tool to use to do that.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I think it's just the culture of education at a certain point where we just begin to standardize everything. Everything's like, what was your score? Like, what was your date? What was your GRA score? Was your score good enough to get you in college? Was your score good enough to get everything score? But you forget the human
level or score. We're leveling or scoring.
Exactly. Even like kids like, what's your Lexile score? I'm like, who knows? Like, I don't know what do the numbers really mean? They help us see things, but also it's like that number. Like some kids are literally in schools as numbers. We forget that they're
No.
humans. And I think that oftentimes, because of the standardization of culture, of test scores and just numbering thing, that it becomes a way of thinking around, here's this book, score it. Here's this tool, score it. And it's like, forget the score. What's in the tool? What does it help you to do? What conversations come out of it? And that's a completely different. It's a conversation of saying, oh, it scored a 4, next point. It's like, well, why is it a 4? It's like, well, it's because of this, the X, Y, and Z. And that's what we want the tool to actually do, is cause and spark those conversations.
Absolutely. I have a question for you, Quintin.
Yes.
So we talk a lot on our podcast about high quality instructional materials, so curriculum that we hope that, more teachers get to use those materials so that they're not having to start from scratch and find all their own texts and write their own curriculum. But I'm wondering how this, I could see a teacher saying, well, I don't have a choice in what my texts are. I'm using this curriculum. So why bother using this toolkit?
Yep.
Exactly. I don't agree with that, but I'm wondering.
No, that's actually a great question, because I was that teacher. I don't have time for think about, for example, EL curriculum. The EL curriculum is a much scripted curriculum in a way in which it provides you with the assessments, it provides you with the books that you can choose, and things of that sort. But one thing we notice is that curriculums don't change as much as the classroom does, right? Every single year you get a class, it's the makeup, the demographic, the ways you're learning, the standards are all shifting, right? And sometimes it takes the curriculums a little longer to catch up to it, which it's okay. So here's what I would say to a teacher like me who's I don't have time for this. And I would always ask, well, think about the person who made time for you. Do you want to be that person for this child or not? And guarantee you that teacher will be like, okay, yes, I want to be that person. Yeah, of course I want to be that person. Well, here's a way you can be that person. I actually encourage teachers, I want you to find a child in your class who may be the most quiet child, maybe the one whose voice you may not hear as much of in the classroom, and pick up a book and make it a book that's a mirror that reflects this child, and just have the conversation about this child and their relation in comparison to the book. I guarantee you that child has a lot they want to share, but probably has never had the opportunity or the chance to even share their words. And so experiences like that are the experiences that change lives. And so tools like this can be tools or ways to help you have these powerful conversations that change lives. I don't know any teacher who has been in the classroom for years who does not love what they do every single day. Teaching is not an easy job. I'd say teachers are some of the most powerful people in the world. We're caregivers, we're with the counselors, we're with the nurse, we're everything, right? And we have power in these children's lives, and that it takes 5 minutes to change your life. And if you can take 5 minutes to use this tool to find a book that you can share multiple times, why not do it? Why not? And, resistance is natural. There's teachers are going through a lot right now. We're trying to figure out whether we're going to be teaching in person or we're going to be hybrid. There's a lot of things happening. And so any way that we can support and love on our students as much as we want to be loved on as teachers, think about that. I always say, where's the love? The love that you feel, or the love that you want this child to feel, is this process helping you do it? This toolkit does it.
You're making me think about, and I'm going to turn this into a question for you in a moment, but when, you just gave that great example of students who are marginalized and showing them that you see them. What I love in that example is that, yes, you're aware of, the diversity in your class or the makeup of your class. But this example that you gave was a student who really was a quiet student, and how that student could see him or herself in the text. And that I've been thinking a lot about the idea that mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors goes so beyond race. Race is the first thing you see. And kind of that we think about, but there is so much more to it than that. And I love the idea of like thinking about the students as whole people and thinking like about the nuances of their personalities.
Yep.
So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, because I think that's so important. Like that really as a teacher was like where I found true joy, getting to know my students, like not just what they like and dislike, but like the little nuances of their personalities and how we can bring that to them using this toolkit to find texts.
Yeah. Yes, I have a story that like I use a lot, and I keep it with this child still to this day. So this kind of will address the high quality instructional material topic, but also this learning and being with the student. So I taught in an inclusive classroom, and so half of my students had IEPs, and half of my students were typically developing, as we said at that point in time. So I had a little boy in my class named Jeremiah. He was completely nonverbal, and he was the just cutest kid in the world. He loved to be with the group, but was just not verbal, and that was okay because we found other ways for him to communicate. So we got to a point in the year where we were going to try pushing in a few small vocabulary words and having him use them and do a few call and response things of that sort. And so I said, I'm like, what is going on? I pulled out every single trick in the book. I'm looking up research. I'm pulling out all kind of stuff. I'm like, what is going on? I attended a few like speech therapy classes to get a few tips on how I can support. I mean, I'm doing the work, right? I literally almost gave up. And I went to the mom and dad and was like, what's happening at home? We know he's using words at home. What's happening at home that's not happening here? Mm. That question changed my entire life with him that year. Dad was a tech person. He always saw dad on the computer. Mom was also a tech person too. So there was a lot of screen time that he saw the parents use. And so a lot of the communication he saw was through Zoom, through typing, through Slack and things of that sort. And so Dad was like, well, he communicates a lot through the iPad. Like he can spell out different words and communicate with you. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, can I start bringing the iPad in? And I want you to see how he communicates. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, let's do it. And so I remember sitting at the table with him one day and I sat next to him. I was like, so Jeremiah, how's your lunch today? He literally goes to the screen and says, good. So he spoke to the screen, not me. So I said, oh, well, what part was good? Carrots. I'm like, okay. I said, let's see how well this goes. I said, I like your shoes. Where'd you get your shoes from? Gift. I was able to communicate with him.
Wow.
The tablet. It took me knowing that child and his family to know that iPad was a bridge for communication, which I go back to this idea of like the idea behind high quality instructional materials. I think we all should have access to, but I'm leaning more towards the term now responsive instructional materials, because I can take that same tablet and put it in a different classroom with a different child, and it may not be as responsive. Mm-hmm. I can take the same tablet and put it in a school with children who have visual impairments. It may not be as effective. But for this child, that was a high quality instructional material that allowed him to do the work that he needed to do in that classroom. And so when I think about knowing your students and what they need and the responsiveness behind that, it makes that material high quality. To me, it's the high quality instructional material, but it's responsive. It's really a responsive tool. I can pick up a curriculum and go into a typical development classroom and it works perfectly. But I go into a classroom that has students who have varying abilities. It may not be high quality anymore. So do we still call it high quality? Or is it more of this tool is responsive to the children, to the students in this classroom? These materials are responsive to the students in this classroom. And so I know I catch a lot of slack about that because HQIM is popular right now. It's like the trending word right now. And so I just encourage that we do think about those high quality instructional materials, but how can those materials be more responsive versus just laying on the fact of like, it's high quality, checkbox done. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that's what I was thinking when I asked the question earlier, right? Is like, even if you're told you have to teach this text, like you have to teach this text, right, going through the process of this toolkit, would help me as a teacher to think through like, okay, like it not just a surface level, like, okay, the main character in this is a boy and I have 50% boy. So what do I do for the girls? Right. But like, that's so surface level, but like thinking through, like you have to think through, like you said, your students and all that they bring to the table for their identity, not just the race and gender and the things that are the.
As I say, those are the things you can see. Like I always had that people will judge you based on the things they can see. You can see race. You can sometimes see gender. But you can definitely see race. You can definitely see, and based on the way you carry yourself, you can see ethnicity, because we know race and ethnicity are different. And so, and even down to certain attires, you may see religion represented based on different cultural symbols, crosses, and things of that sort. And so
I feel like you can even see you might even be able to see social class depending on what you're wearing or
what they're wearing, where their buses are coming from, where their address is. I mean, I know teachers who look up addresses. I hate to say
what they bring in their lunchbox, I mean, there's a lot that could contribute.
What time they get to school.
Yeah. And like you said, though, like a lot of assumptions can be made about all of those things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
About just generally assumptions that could be made, but then like, especially thinking about how they'll connect with or not connect with a text, and I think the toolkit helps me think through, like, don't make those assumptions, really think about who your students are.
Exactly. And I always, when I'm still doing teacher training, one thing I always ask, well, did you ask?
Yeah.
They're like, well, I mean, I can I ask? Yeah. Ask them where they're from. How's their family made up? Where they visited, places they traveled to. It's nothing worse than you planning an amazing unit about, let's say, for example, you plan an amazing unit around what happens at the Greek Olympics, right? And kids are like, I have no clue what the Olympics are. Like, what is that? It's like, what? And did you ask them what they thought the Olympics was? No. So that's where the responsiveness comes in. You ask those questions. And I always say, I should be asking the kids as many questions as I ask them. Like, it's a two-way street. I want to learn. You should learn too. Mr. Quintin, where you from? I'm from here. Where are you from? Well, I'm from here too. Oh, what language do you use at home? Oh, we use that too. Okay. Like, that's how we build those connections. And those relationships are the foundation for how to be responsive in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then that all seeps over into, as you're working through the text, I feel like then students can, like, the first step is know yourself and know your students. So you really can't get past anything in the text before you know those things. Then when you head into the text, you can really start thinking about where students may connect to or may need some additional work with, like you just mentioned, right? Vocabulary or different knowledge building that they may need to access the text, and maybe where this text falls in a set of texts so that it's accessible for them. And I know you're related to like high quality materials. And I think that is something that, I've heard a couple times or even seen on the Facebook groups, like, oh, my students aren't going to connect to thunder rolling in the mountains because they're not this race. But if you go through the toolkit and you use the toolkit as a tool to unpack this text, although race is the first thing you see, it's not the only thing that's happening in that book by any stretch of the imagination. There's so much more. And I think that's what, like, I really just keep thinking, in using your toolkit, like there's so much more. And it's so important to use something like this to help even like reset your own thinking as a teacher, right? Like reset your thinking, reset your mindset. And we're heading into the school year. It's a great start to do that.
Exactly. I mean, everybody's like the all about me thing now. Like, it's the beginning of the school year. Do it. Like, tap into it. That was my favorite unit. I mean, literally, before COVID hit, I was like inviting parents into the classroom and saying, bringing in outdoor guests and like taking the kids to different experiences, because all those experiences matter. And I think is bottom line, is that experiences matter. And just the toolkit really will just help you to think about books differently. I mean, there's a book right now that I'm looking at it's called Windows by Julia Denos. And the book basically is about a character, a black or brown character who is walking down the street from his home, walking his dog at night. He kind of walks this convenience store and then makes it back home. So it's a great story to kind of just see like diversity in the neighborhood. But then you look at that book through the lens of like reality and what it means for a black boy with a hoodie on walking on the street. We know historically black boys with hoodie on don't make it home at night, whether they're the nicest kid in the world or whether they are the most misbehaved child in the world. Either way, that experience for a black and brown boy to walk down the street, if that's the story and the narrative that's only in this book, what happens when their peer doesn't make it home? How do we explain that? But the thing with the toolkit is that that's just one perspective. Toolkit says bring multiple perspectives in. So now I'm going to bring in the book Crown and Ode to the Fresh Cut, because same black character about the everyday life of a black boy, but this book also talks about the other experience of black boys. Like it's one term in the book or a phrase that says the character needs angels to guide him when he leaves the barbershop because it's no longer a safe space. And so helping the kids say, well, what does that mean? And so if you have this book that says, hey, here's this kid that walks to the store and comes back, but then there's also another perspective that says, hey, you need protection when you leave here. That's the conversation that should be happening in the classroom. Like, what does that mean? And that conversation right there can include vocabulary. It can include those connections, equations. You can say, now use evidence from the book to tell me why your explanation was that, because that's a part of the shifts we see. You use more evidence. And so the toolkit, it does that. It's like you said earlier, it's not just a check mark, oh, this book is good, this book is bad, but it's more of this book has this function. So now I know I need a book that does this other function. So that way I know we can get the full story.
You know, it's so funny because before you told that story, I was going to ask you, like, is there a balance you want to strike between mirrors and windows? You know, I'm looking for the number of like. but you just,
Melissa wants a checkbox now.
I do. Like, is this enough windows and enough mirrors to balance out the windows?
It's so hard because I do the same thing. So I'm like, okay, how many books on my bookshelf do I have? Like, do this. I'm like, wait, how does the book function? And that's the hard part. Like, oftentimes it's like my bookshelf's diverse. And then it's like, well, okay, cool. Now, what do you do with it? What are the stories in there?
I feel like that's so important for our leaders listening to hear, right? Yeah. Like, it's the function of the books, and it in the space of the the toolkit, which really is in the space of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, right? It's helping to see that whole picture. Because as you were talking, I was thinking about my daughter, who's almost 10, and she's white, and I was thinking, wow, I really, those books that you're mentioning, that would be amazing for her to see into a different space, right?
Exactly.
But not just that space. Like, there's so many other things too that we're reading all 13 aloud right now. And she's, I started reading it aloud and now she's like itching to read more. But it's about that's a whole different culture that we're exploring and answering questions about. And again, those children are about her age. So there's like that mirror aspect of like, oh my gosh, they're like, we're all children here. Right. So, but what you just mentioned, we could find so many different mirrors there as well as windows. So I think it's really like, I almost think of this as like a big challenge, the toolkit, because it's like you could find a ton of mirrors and a ton of windows. It's just you have to really think deeply about each text.
Yep.
And then in relation to your students, like you said.
I agree. And one question that has come up, I will be honest, with the development of this toolkit is this toolkit something that should be done on an individual teacher base? Is it something that's done as a planning group? Is it something that administration should do and kind of really set out, what books are being used? To me, it's all the above. Like, goes back to agency and voice. It should be everybody's voice, including the students. I think oftentimes we're like, what are the parents saying? What are the teachers saying? What is the district saying? Did y'all ask the kids what they want? Nobody decided to ask the kids, and they're here all day. This is for them. So, like,
here all day. It's so true.
But we often think they won't know, right? But they do.
They do. I promise. So one year, and this was actually a great experience too, is that one summer, I had gotten my preschool kids were transitioned to pre-K. So it was like a summer program. And so I'm prepping, I'm planning. I'm like, all right, August gets here. We're going to kick it off strong. I have my bookshelf set up. And I'm in this place now. I'm like, all right, I'm going through my books. What's represented? I'm throwing books out, putting books here, throwing books out. And by the time I finished, I had like 2 newspapers. I'm like, this isn't going to work. And so I asked each parent, I said, if you could bring in one book that you use in your family, in your household. Parents were bringing multiple books back to back. They wanted to be a part of the classroom. They wanted to be a part of the learning. Kids saw that and they're like, this is the book from my house. We read this book and we have this conversation.
That's
and
so
then we
cool.
do this and we do this. And so now I have now embedded every student's book perspective in my classroom on the bookshelf.
Mm-hmm.
Their perspective is now being shared to me. It's also now being shared to their peers. And guess what? That is something I did every single year. We designed the bookshelf. The teacher, this is not Quintin's bookshelf. This is the classroom bookshelf. This is our community bookshelf. Parents bringing books in, bringing books out. Parents like, oh, this is the season for us. This is the holiday and tradition we're doing. Let's bring this book in. I'll come in and read it and I'll expand on it. Mm-hmm. And one thing about me, I love having parents come in and do lessons. I'm like, whoo, read for a few minutes, right?
Yeah.
I love that.
But it was a great way for the parents to know how much literacy matters.
Yeah.
The power of literacy, and that I value them in all their identities in the class.
I bet you learned so much about the families too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was incredible. And like going back to that, me being on my personal journey of learning, that was my year of like growth. It was so challenging, learning certain terms that were offensive and not offensive, and nicknames that were offensive and not offensive, and certain signs and hand motions that were, I mean, it really makes you think like, wow, where have I been my whole entire life? You know, there's richness in the classroom, and I just had to open the door. That's it. And when I opened it, it came flooding in.
So amazing.
I think that's also a theme that I find in the toolkit. It's really just about, it's like a learning journey through a book, like you just mentioned, right? You're learning as you go through that year, and you're learning as you unpack a text in the toolkit, and it never ends as a teacher or a leader. You just keep learning.
It's a journey of living and learning.
Mm-hmm.
But it
should not be like live, laugh, love. It should be live, laugh, learn.
Exactly, literally. That's great. I like it. That's a t-shirt. I see a few coffee mugs.
We're going to outsource that, okay?
I love it.
So, Quintin, we always end with asking our guests to share a piece of advice with our listeners. So we'd love for you to share a piece of advice. Could be about anything.
Good one. You know what? I'm gonna remix a quote that I heard from Gholdy Muhammad again, because I'm obsessed with her. I love her work to death. So when I was writing my dissertation, I struggled with having my voice present. Like, you know, there's this prescribed way of writing a dissertation. Like, it should do this, 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 this. And when I wrote it, I felt like it was no longer me. It wasn't my voice anymore. And she told me that I had to become more comfortable in loving my language and who I was and my words so much that no one can ever tell you how to use them. There should be no reason why you should feel uncomfortable using your voice and using it authentically. And so my biggest advice is that, especially for our teachers who feel they're in a space where they want to make change and bring in these diverse books, and they may have some challenges, whether it's administration or funding or things of that sort.
Right.
Remember that your voice has power. Your voices have power, and people are just waiting for you to speak up and listen. I always say it's easier to go and get a no than to not know it at all. And so I was that radical teacher. I called myself like the neighborhood abolitionist. That was my thing. Like, that was my thing. But it was a way for me to have my voice. And when I started speaking up, I noticed others were like, I got your back. I'm behind you too. And then like that snowball just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And once that support happens, change comes. I mean, like this toolkit. I mean, I had this crazy idea of like, I want to do this thing. And SAP is like, we want to do it too. And like, that was the snowball. And like, here's the snowball in this space with you all growing as well. And so just know that your voice has power and your one little line can cause great change. And so change can happen.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Great advice.
And actually perfect advice for podcast, right?
Yeah. We're just sharing your voice more than anything.
Yeah, exactly.
I love it.
I have one final thing for you, Quintin.
Yes.
Melissa, I told you I didn't tell you I was going to do this today, but I did order. So I saw this thing, these cards called pod decks. And they're really fun ways to ask questions for your podcast guests. And I feel like I pulled a question, and if you're game, are you game to answer it? Okay.
I'm totally game. Let's do it.
So I'll give you two options. Can we do that?
Let's do it. Okay.
Okay. All right. So can you share either your morning or your night routine, or your most embarrassing moment? It could be in education or personally, which I think would be hilarious. It's up to you which one you choose, though, based on your comfortability.
So this is actually a good one. So it's kid friendly too, also. So okay. So working with 4 and 5 year olds, especially walking to parks and things like that, it's an adventure. Like I'm pulling out like the ropes and everything. We're like hanging on. We got our arms. We're like linked up, shuffling down the street. We're doing everything, right? And so I had found this really cool, like super long bungee cord, right? And so I had kids who thought it'd be cool to just stop and we stretch it, but they didn't realize that when you hold on to it and come back, we all go like this. So I'm in the park with 25 kids, and they did it, and we ended up all on the ground together. So now I have parents walking over. Police officers like, is everything okay? I'm like, we just fell. Like, we just... Now it's a guy in the park with 22 kids. We're all on the ground. They're kicking and screaming, laughing. I'm like... Let's just get back to school.
No, listen,
It's hilarious.
if you had done the toolkit, you would have known your students were going to do that.
Exactly. I did not know that. I did the toolkit. I mean, literally, I'm like 25 4 and 5 year olds out in the middle of the park, just stretched out. I'm like, defects gonna. Like, it's gonna be so bad. We only have
my gosh,
but it's okay. We survived. So hands down.
Oh my gosh.
Moment teaching, hands down. Like
that's how I imagine every day with 4 and 5 year olds.
Totally. The main park right in the middle of campus. So students walking. I'm like trying to be cool teacher. It just
That's so funny.
That is great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I might just give everybody that one because honestly, I love like a good embarrassing moment.
I didn't know what Lori was going to ask you. I was
yeah. I pulled two. I mean, it depends. Not everybody's comfortable sharing that. So
I just relived that in my head. That was a hilarious moment. Like, actually, one of the parents was like walking. She was like, "Is he okay?" I'm like, "I promise, it was not on purpose."
That is amazing.
So
well, thank you for sharing, and thank you for being here, Quintin.
Yeah.
We really enjoyed talking with you today.
Yeah, and Quintin will post a link to the toolkit so that people can see it, of course. But I just wanted to share real quick that on the toolkit, 2 things. One, there's amazing resources.
Yes.
Like I've saved this for myself because I'm like, I need to look at all of them. And then I did see, just confirm this for me, that you're all still taking feedback on the toolkit. Is that correct?
We are literally like in prototype phase, and we're actually like starting like the week after next, we'll be like revamp and do like some hard revisions. So if y'all have any like specifics or ideas, please shoot them my way because we're like,
you got it.
Want all of it.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And maybe once you do your final draft, we could add it as a link on our website too. We'll do like a resources link. Okay.
Oh, 100%. Totally can do that. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank
it was great to meet you.
Thank you so much for your time. Yeah, it was amazing to meet you.
Well, thank y'all. So good to meet you. I had a great time. This is a great spark to my day. So thanks for having me.
Same here.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of your day, Quintin.
You too. Talk later. See y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.